How are grappling sequences initiated in MMA? Well, it's through takedowns, trips, and sweeps. These come in many forms, whether it be upper body to lower body connection, like more traditional leg attacks, or in the form of lower body to lower body attacks, like inside trips and any other kind of foot sweeps. The time spent on the canvas is what is typically called control time. The fighter who is being controlled and the one who is doing the controlling are defined by bottom and top positions. The way grappling sequences come to an end is whenever the physical body-to-body connection ends, and when both fighters are typically on their feet. Simple enough, right? Well, what if I told you there's something not enough MMA grapplers are doing that could extend the time of their grappling sequences? Well, if you know how to read, it's Matt Returns. It's Matt. Hey everyone, I'm Pac MMA, and to follow up my last video about MMA wrestling, which you should check out if you haven't already, I'll be talking about one of the things I'm most passionate about in MMA, Matt Returns. And that's because very few fighters do them. Now, what are mat returns? I don't think my definition is necessarily different from what most people would consider to be mat returns, but some people may still disagree. I define mat returns as, well, returning your opponent to the canvas after you've already taken them down and they're recovering to their feet. Now, the reason why some might disagree with my definition here is the prerequisite of having already been taken down. Some consider any takedown from a standing clinch or body lock position to be a mat return, which I can agree with. In essence, the techniques are the same and nothing is separating the two technique-wise, but my contention lies with the term itself. Mat return in pretty much all forms of isolated wrestling. A mat return is what occurs when you have already acquired top position and you try to get your opponent back down to the mat as they build up. Now, this distinction isn't really important in the grand scheme of things, but it actually does matter here, and that's because of the UFC statistics. I'll speak about that later, but first I'm going to explain why mat returns are so important to an MMA grappler's arsenal. Mat returns in MMA extend your grappling sequences just from a logical perspective. As I said in the intro, grappling sequences go from takedown to control to get up. But in between control and escape, if you can successfully initiate a mat return, you extend your control phase by returning your opponent back to the floor. Seems really useful, right? There's also a variety of mat returns that apply to MMA, so you don't need to expend a ton of energy going for them. Like the big power slams from Aljamain Sterling in his fight with Movsar Evloev, which are solid and can be demoralizing for the opponent, getting thrown around all over the place. However, it is also extremely draining, especially when you charge up the slams rather than making it a quicker and easier movement, and that's exactly what happened to Aljo versus Movsar. He ended up committing too hard on mat returns, fading later into the fight where Movsar would outlast and outgrapple Aljo in a couple moments to edge a pretty close decision. So mat returns are useful in MMA. So why don't more fighters use them? I honestly don't have an answer to this question other than most fighters just don't know the techniques, or if they do, they don't train them consistently enough to perform them in a fight. There's no real explanation as to why mat returns seem so uncommon in MMA grappling scenarios, and you might think they're not as uncommon as I'm making them out to be, but the prime position of where nearly all mat returns occur is on the back with the rear body lock, or otherwise known as a back clinch. This is one of the most common positions in all of MMA grappling because a lot of fighters tend to give up their back against the cage to fight the hands to escape. There have been many moments in fights where a grappler is holding this position and they don't even attempt to mat return, and of course that's related to energy expenditure and a multitude of different factors within a fight, but considering how common the position is and how strangely uncommon mat returns are in MMA, it's safe to assume that the reason there's low usage of them is that they're not heavily trained. But let's look at some mat returns since I've talked about the logistics long enough. The prime user of mat returns in today's age of MMA is former bantamweight champion Merab Dvalishvili. He showed a plethora of these specifically in the Corey Sandhagen fight, and before I go over some techniques, I just want to mention how weird the UFC stat makers score these takedowns for Merab. According to the official stats, Merab landed 20 of 37 takedowns, which, after watching the fight back for screenshots in this video, is just blatantly wrong. And this is because the stats include mat returns, which aren't necessarily takedowns, and if you can't take my word for it, here's Daniel Cormier addressing the same stat.
He scored 20 takedowns. When Khabib got 22 takedowns, by the way, mat returns aren't takedowns, but if that's what we're calling them, Chael, he did that 20 times.
I counted about 15 true takedowns from Merab and about 12 mat returns, which take my own stats with a grain of salt, but regardless, Merab's stats are still incredibly impressive, regardless of specific numbers.
More specifics.
In folk-style wrestling, mat returns aren't given points in the same way as takedowns because you still have control over the position. It's simply an extension of that control time, which is why people like Daniel Cormier and I don't believe mat returns should be scored as takedowns, but anyway, let's refer to the actual techniques Merab was using. One of Merab's go-to techniques is this leg block mat return. It's a little different from the technique in this particular video that I'm showing on screen because Merab really commits to the kicking out of the other leg and really sinks in under Corey's hips. But the general premise of this trip is to pull the opponent back by dropping down, kicking one leg forward while using your knee to block the other foot as they fall, hence the name leg block. You could also call this a kick out since the principal mechanics are very similar. Merab lands this particular trip on Corey about 4 times, I believe. This trip is very effective in MMA because in this position, most guys seem to plant their feet hard as they try to fight the hands, making it easier to manipulate their weight as they're unbalanced. I think this is also why Merab commits so much harder to dropping his butt as he kicks Corey's legs out, because Corey is so heavy on his feet. Dropping down hard gives Merab the momentum needed to actually be able to push his leg out, because the harder, the heavier something is, the more force you have to exert to move it. Even Movsar Evlov did this to Aljamain Sterling in their fight, which was pretty cool, and figured I'd also mention that. The simplest mat return most fighters tend to use is this one. Petr Yan does a similar lift and dump against Aljo in their first fight actually, elevating Aljo and just dunking him back down to the canvas. This one isn't nearly as effective as the leg block simply because there's a lot less control and it's more telegraphed. You'll see a lot of fighters get lifted, but they'll still be able to get back up to their feet as they'll either land on their hands or on their knees. Since this move requires a lift, it's a lot harder for the person on top to apply pressure immediately, making it a lot easier for the guy on bottom to pop right back up to their feet. Probably my favorite mat return is this. It goes by many names: the back trip, the stretcher trip, the cross scissor trip, whatever you want to call it. And the essential mechanics of this one are that you have to pull your opponent back and their weight has to be leaning into you, which makes it hard to do from the stand-up body lock position I was talking about earlier, and obviously you have to split your feet. It's a lot easier to do this when your opponent's knees are slightly bent or in some way putting their weight backwards. Here's a breakdown of the technique step by step from Iron Faith Wrestling.
I feel the weight leaning into me. Look what my legs are gonna do. So I'm going to step my right leg to the left, and I'm gonna drop to my left knee. So this is the position I'm getting in. And I'm pulling him over top of the leg that's straight. So one knee's down, one leg is up, and I'm pulling him over top of that leg.
This technique lands you on their back or on top and side control, as displayed by Petr Yan. This mat return has been used by him a lot, and I believe Merab has also hit this trip before, but I can't remember which fight it was in. There are so many fighters that would benefit from using mat returns or adding different, more energy-efficient mat returns to their grappling arsenal. Now, most fighters do use simple foot sweeps from the back clinch position, but a lot of the time those tend to be ineffective at the highest level. Overall, mat returns are an extremely useful and efficient tool that every MMA fighter should be using to chain and extend their grappling sequences, which not nearly enough of them use. This should be something that is common to every single MMA fighter and that every MMA fighter is training for. This will probably be the last video of the year. Thank you for the growth and support that many of you have shown on this channel. I love discussing these nuanced techniques in MMA. Not that this one was very nuanced, but it's still one of my biggest pet peeves in MMA. So thank you all for watching. Comment your thoughts down below. This has been Pac MMA, off to a good 2026. Goodbye.